I feel impacted by my relationship to bird language in every part of my life because of the way in which bird language enables me to see more clearly how I'm impacting the spaces around me. And when my disturbance or my field of potentially even harm is out beyond my awareness of how I might be harming or negatively impacting spheres around me, as well as my capacity to be really tracking subtle patterns. So the same brain patterns that we're working with through bird language can be applied to tracking interactions between human beings. They can be applied to tracking patterns of power and privilege and on a systemic level. That it's the same essential brain patterns of looking at things in relationship to one another. So I was at my sit spot this morning and thinking about, there's this question in my mind as I'm sitting at my sit spot of what am I missing, right? What am I not taking into consideration right now? What reality may be true for some bird or creature out here that I haven't thought of yet? And the reminder that is to not, to leave open space for realities being different than I might be able to perceive them, and maintaining an openness to finding out and a curiosity to finding out what those are. So in human interactions, that feels like a valuable thing to be carrying around. In communities, that feels like a valuable thing to be carrying around. What am I missing? And particularly when coming to as a, for me as, I bonked my mic. For me as a, walking through the world perceived as white, I am benefiting from a lot of privilege. And so when I'm in spaces of racial diversity, my ability to show up to those conversations in ways that are really responsible and deeply respectful, and to build connection from an authentic place, to build reciprocal and authentic relationship, is really enhanced by what I have learned from the birds and from bird language, and the kind of awareness, the kind of gentle awareness that bird language builds. I experience bird language as something that reminds me of my embeddedness in a network of beings, that reminds me of the ways in which I am consistently impacting the beings around me. And that for me brings a sense of peace, of that I am of something, I am from something, I belong. Even though I belong within a complex history of displacement and violence and genocide, I am of what I am around. I am still a part of. And that deep sense of peace and belonging means that when I'm in difficult dialogues that from my perspective are deeply necessary for the healing of human relations in this world right now, I can enter into that conversation and really be challenged and pushed and have hard questions asked of me. I can have people ask me to look in some really hard places to look and not be shaken off of a deeper center, to have a kind of peace within myself that allows me to navigate discomfort and challenging conversations that feel essential to me that we be having.
Can you introduce yourself, like your name and what you do, or something like that?
In relation to Weaving Earth, or
yeah.
just?
Yeah.
My name is Melodie, and I'm the Youth Programs Coordinator for Weaving Earth Center for Relational Education. I think of bird language as a network of relationships, of lots and lots of interconnected beings whose lives and behaviors impact one another, and it's the vocalization, or sometimes not the vocalization, but it's bird language essentially is the conversation that's happening in the forest and in the cities and wherever birds are all of the time, that is embedded within the network of relationships that exist in the natural world between beings, and the way in which the well-being of all of the birds is tied in with the well-being of the bobcat and the fox, and for their for the birds' survival, the systems of communication that they have developed, which exist in a kind of a patterned language with patterns of response that show up across different species and across different landscapes, and both independent of context and highly dependent on context. Yeah, that's some of what I think of.
Okay. Cool.
Well, as a person who works with children and is pretty focused on learning styles and observing how different people take in information and how different modes of learning support different kinds of learning within each individual, I use games often to support a kind of embodiment of learnings. So for me, games help me to be in my body in a way that allows me to access the information that I'm learning through that game, even when my brain is distracted or when certain mental processes are not at the forefront. And that when I have a felt sensation of a principle in the bird language realm, I feel it in a more visceral way, which for me is an empathy builder when I think of what is happening in a bird's daily reality. When I have the emotional experience of that through game, through allowing myself to fully step into the play of the game and be in it as reality for that time, I have the emotion which I then connect to what the birds are experiencing. And although they may be feeling it without the same kind of human emotional lens that I have, I feel it in my body, which is for me a place of empathy building.
Nice.
I'm so tangly today.
That's
That doesn't make any sense. I'm with you. Keep going. Huh?
Okay, cool.
You
You're
can
doing great.
cut out as much as you want.
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day about, well, actually, I was sitting down working on a little crafting project, and California Toei hopped up to where I was working, and I sat there looking at it and had that feeling of affection and noticing subtleties of its little streaking up by its beak and the little rusty color at the base of its tail, and noticing the tremendous level of affection that I have for California Toei's. And I thought to myself, why is it that I care so much about the California Toei? And I remembered California Toei that lived at the first place that I moved into when I just moved out to California, that had a white patch on its wing, a round white circle about the size of a golf ball in the middle of its wing, which made that Toei highly recognizable. And so I would see it every day, and that white circle was a reminder for me of what is true with all birds, especially in my home territory where I see them frequently, that each bird is an individual being as well as a member of a species, and that the tendencies of that being are distinct from the others in its species. And so that particular Toei I grew really fond of, and that for me has translated into my relationship now with all California Toei's, and that the particular capacities for awareness and reflection that I have come to through bird language are what enable me to have that feeling of recognition of the individual, because I'm revisiting the same spot again and again and looking to really hone in on those individual patterns of behavior. my experience of bird language has built empathy for me with the birds and a deepened sense of connection through knowing them more intimately as both individuals and species. And as I develop through observation the sense of the niches that each bird species fills within the web of the bird language system that's out there, I have a deepened sense of the who behind the bird, who that bird is, and how they play into the bigger picture that enables me to love them more for knowing them more deeply.
Nice.
One of the biggest impacts that I have felt on my relationship to nature as a whole through my experience with bird language is a sense of embeddedness, a sense of belonging. And as I remember how to listen to what's happening, and that moment of picking up on something and knowing that the fox is coming because I'm hearing the birds alarming coming towards me along the path where I see the fox tracks, I have that feeling of belonging as I am able to read what is happening around me, and also as I then see the ways in which I'm impacting the landscape around me, because the birds are such an incredible mirror for how I'm showing up, for the way that I'm conducting myself and carrying myself. And if I'm moving without awareness in my footsteps, they'll let me know pretty quickly, which is then disrupting them from their day and what they might otherwise have been doing. So just the reminder that all of what I am, that I'm on the other end of those relationships also, that I am in relationship with all of what is around me, whether I am aware of it or not. So through the process of becoming more aware of that through bird language, feeling a deepening of my sense of belonging and embeddedness and part ofness with the natural world.
That was so much good stuff right there.
Bird language affects my conservation ethic in that bird language is another set of tools for building direct relationship with the natural world. And in all of the places where I have direct relationship with something, that's when I care most deeply about it. And that feels true to me both in terms of the natural world and environmental conservation, as well as social and political activism. People are most motivated to care about the things that they have direct relationship with and to take actions to protect that which they love. And if there's no opportunity to build a direct relationship, it's harder to have authentic bonds of love and therefore the desire to protect and caretake. So bird language is a tool to build unmediated relationship with that which we would be conserving, and lends towards a kind of ethic that is beyond rational thought, beyond the knowing that we need to do this so that this can happen, and all of the science behind that explains why things are happening in the way that they are. And while that can support and is also very important, it's a visceral thing. It's what makes my body stand up to be actively in mindful and protecting, caretaking relationship. So it's an ethic not only of the mind, but an ethic in practice, in action, that flows forth from authentic feelings of connection. The awareness that comes along with bird language is then something that applies to everything everywhere and changes my way of seeing the world around me. And in the context of a backyard, all of a sudden, as I make choices about how to engage and interact with the place around me, the landscape of my backyard, whether it's large or tiny, my ability to be thinking about how the birds might interact with that is increased by real observations of how birds move through space and what is of benefit to them and what's challenging to them. So as my empathy for birds builds through my relationship to them, they're then part of my awareness, just like I would think about a friend and think, oh, I know that they like chocolate cake. I'm going to make them that for their birthday and bring that to them. My desire to create a space that is hospitable and supportive to beings that I care about is increased. So I think that's how. I feel impacted by my relationship to bird language in every part of my life because of the way in which bird language enables me to see more clearly how I'm impacting the spaces around me. And when my disturbance or my field of potentially even harm is out beyond my awareness of how I might be harming or negatively impacting spheres around me, as well as my capacity to be really tracking subtle patterns. So the same brain patterns that we're working with through bird language can be applied to tracking interactions between human beings. They can be applied to tracking patterns of power and privilege and on a systemic level. That it's the same essential brain patterns of looking at things in relationship to one another. So I was at my sit spot this morning and thinking about, there's this question in my mind as I'm sitting at my sit spot of what am I missing, right? What am I not taking into consideration right now? What reality may be true for some bird or creature out here that I haven't thought of yet? And the reminder that is to not, to leave open space for realities being different than I might be able to perceive them, and maintaining an openness to finding out and a curiosity to finding out what those are. So in human interactions, that feels like a valuable thing to be carrying around. In communities, that feels like a valuable thing to be carrying around. What am I missing? And particularly when coming to as a for me as I bonked my mic. For me as a walking through the world perceived as white, I am benefiting from a lot of privilege, and so when I'm in spaces of racial diversity, my ability to show up to those conversations in ways that are really responsible and deeply respectful, and to build connection from an authentic place, to build reciprocal and authentic relationship, is really enhanced by what I have learned from the birds and from bird language, and the kind of awareness, the kind of gentle awareness that bird language builds. I would also say that bird language, that I experience bird language as something that reminds me of my embeddedness in a network of beings, that reminds me of the ways in which I am consistently impacting the beings around me. And that for me brings a sense of peace, of that I am of something, I am from something, I belong. Even though I belong within a complex history of displacement and violence and genocide, I am of what I am around. I am still a part of. And that deep sense of peace and belonging means that when I'm in difficult dialogues that from my perspective are deeply necessary for the healing of human relations in this world right now, I can enter into that conversation and really be challenged and pushed and have hard questions asked of me. I can have people ask me to look in some really hard places to look and not be shaken off of a deeper center, to have a kind of peace within myself that allows me to navigate discomfort and challenging conversations that feel essential to me that we be having. So,
That's great.
my grandparents live in Georgia, and I grew up in New York, and they would come visit us a couple times a year, maybe for really brief periods as they were on work trips, and we would go down there every couple of years. And I don't really know them very well, and we come from vastly different cultural settings, and that there is nothing that has been more profound in building relationship with my grandfather than our shared love of birds and wildlife. And that in having conversations around the dinner table, which so often feel devoid of real places of connection, really looking for those things to build connection around and not finding them with him so much, that has been a place where we can both join the conversation and smile and laugh. And so in my family, birds and my love of them has been a really beautiful connection builder with my grandparents. And the way that birds and wild beings bring out the kind of childlike curiosity in all of us when we allow ourselves to be in awe of something beautiful or something we don't understand. There's a kind of ground for connection that gets to be, that is independent of age and where a person is at in their life. And because as they say, the book of nature has no end, because there's endless mystery in the natural world, and bird language is a door into that, there is no place of stagnancy where one person is at a end cap to their learning because of an age that they have reached, and instead there's shared learning that can happen from whatever place a person is at in their own knowing of the birds and what they're up to. So, sweet connection builder for me. In the realm of bird language, there is no end point to the learning, because the mysteries that are out there are endless. I don't actually really know how to say it. Can you cut the because? You can.
Yeah.
I've heard people say that the book of nature has no end, and so in that, bird language is a learning journey that has no end point. It has no distinct end point. I'm better off the cuff, I guess.
Yeah. I'll try to cut the because. That'll work.
I guess I would highlight the power of being able to track patterns while simultaneously holding open the possibility for divergent truths, and that alone is a powerful thing to be walking in the world with as a capacity, to bring into whatever sphere of life, whether that be social or political or ecological. Yeah. I was in Yosemite for the first time, up about 7 miles north, or 7 miles up from Tuolumne Meadows, at these beautiful lakes called Young Lakes. And I was at Upper Young Lake, and I was wandering around the rocky, grassy, wildflowery shore of Young Lake when I heard this little chipping, and I looked over, and there on a rock a little ways away was this beautiful little finch that I had never seen before, that I later learned was a rosy-cheeked gray finch, which I had never heard of. But I recognized the quality of the vocalization as alarm, and I saw it on this rock, and its body language was so tense and nervous, and its attention was super scattered, and it clearly didn't know where whatever it was looking for was, but it was really looking for it. So it was jerking its head all around, and it would fly around and keep looking around, alarming really incessantly. And I saw that, and I immediately thought to myself, oh, that's what I've heard the birds do in relation to weasels, because of how stealthy the weasels are in appearing and then disappearing and then popping their heads up and then disappearing with their long, lithe, agile bodies. And so I saw the rosy-cheeked gray finch doing that and started looking for weasels, which I had also never seen in that area. I hadn't seen any of the weasels in California yet. And just a few moments later, this pika shot out from under a rock with its squealing pika sound and ran out, and then just a couple feet behind it was this beautiful long-tailed weasel that then ducked down into the rocks, and it was gone fairly quickly. But I stayed there for a while, and again the rosy-cheeked gray finch started doing this alarm a little further on, and fortunately it was somewhat keyed in to where the weasel was, though not exactly. And I moved over more closer to where it was alarming from, and I sat there for a little while, and then out from behind a rock maybe 20 feet away was this weasel that came out into the sun after its unsuccessful pika hunt, and moved pretty slowly across the rocks there. And I even had my binoculars, so I got to see so close to it, and just the immense beauty of a weasel face, and getting to see so closely a face that I had never seen before, and the particular kind of sentience and intelligence that exists in mammal eyes, and as a mammal looking into the eyes of another mammal so close like that, and the ineffable feeling of making contact with another being, getting to meet a new being. So that's the story of my first long-tailed weasel meeting, and were it not for the call of the gray-cheeked rosy finch, I would have kept walking around the edge of that lake looking at the wildflowers, and I'd have missed the weasel. So that's one bird language story.
Nice.
You'll have a whole extra hour of footage just from me. Wordy Melodie. So, this one is good. This has a little magic to it. So, there's a place I love really dearly called Abbott's Lagoon in the Point Reyes National Seashore, and it's a place where I've learned a lot about tracking. It's really amazing. Sand dunes out there, and can follow the coyote tracks for miles, and it's a lagoon, so the walk out to the ocean is a mile or so along the edge of the lagoon. And before I cross the line from the parking lot onto the trail, I always pause and just say hello to that place before I go in there. And that day, as I was paused, getting ready to hop onto the trail to walk down to the ocean along the lagoon, I thought to myself, oh, I see those otter tracks here all the time when I come. They're beautiful little loping trails and slides down from the dunes into the lagoon. I would so love to see an otter. I would so love to see an otter today. If you're out there, I would love to see you. So I kept moving along the trail, and there's a small pond on the other side of the trail. And as I was passing by, there was a little rustling in the grasses, and oftentimes there are rabbits along that trail and birds feeding in the underbrush. There's some salmonberry thicket nearby that they like to hang out in. There's rabbit trails through there and bobcat trails through there. And I would have passed that little rustling sound by were it not for my friend Sam, who I was with, who said, "Oh, did you hear that?" And so we paused for a moment at this little pond, a little offshoot pond from the lagoon. And we were sitting there, and as we were well, we were standing there. As we were standing there, waiting to see if we could hear anything else, this little wren started alarming right along the edge. And it was moving along the edge. The pond wasn't very long, maybe 20 yards end to end, lengthwise. And then there were a couple of ducks, male and female, down at the end. And so this little wren was going down along the length of it. And then just as the wren got over to towards where the ducks were, the ducks plowed out of the water suddenly and flew down to the other end of the pond in their flap of wings and water. And we sat a little surprised, and then the wren started going back the other way. And then once the wren got a little ways down towards the end of the pond where the ducks now were, the ducks bulleted again out of the water and flew down to the end. And Sam and I were watching this and wondering what was happening. And another fun piece was that there were frogs, and that as the wren was moving along, there were frogs that were plowing, like the birds will do, along the surface of the water. And we both had some guesses about what might be going on, and had that sweet moment of getting the guesses confirmed as this little nose popped out of the water with the characteristic little clearing of water from nostrils and round smiling cheeks and whiskers, and the sweet ears and face of an otter popping up on the surface. And as we then saw where the otter was, we were able to watch this pattern happening, which was that the otter would swim along the length, and just a little ways ahead of the otter would be the wren, alarming, poking its head down at it, pointing to the otter swimming just under the surface of the water. And then as the otter would get to where the ducks were, they would plow to the other end of the pond, and then the otter would turn around and start doing the same thing back the other direction. And at the tip of the otter's nose moving through the water was just frogs darting off, and we could see it as it started moving with its head above the water. We could see it snapping at frogs as it was going past, and they were just darting out from it. And we just got to watch that pattern a few times, and then be there while the otter came out on the surface and hung out for a while. But that was a good one. That was sweet too.